Welcome to this ring tutorial. I call it cocktails ring because it's nice and spirally like cocktails, or swirly whirly basically. So you can call it a spiral ring if you want. But as you can see, this one is joined together and the spirals are big. This is another variation on the same theme, but it's adjustable. And I wanted to show you that because if you wanted to make it for a friend and you weren't sure of a ring size, or you wanted to sell it and you wanted more people to have, you could make it like that. So that particular one comes from a book that I wrote, Bead and Wire Jewellery for Special Occasions. And it was in the Valentine's section. So at that time, I called it a lover's ring. And in fact, it was based on a bangle that I'd made, and then I scaled it down to become a ring. So you can see you can have little beads on all the 6 stems and then spiral the ends, or you could have it just with wire and different colored wires. So that book has the other version, which actually I wrote in 2006. So it's ages ago, but this one's very similar, but I'm going to be using rhodonite from Charmer's Gems. I've got this lovely rhodonite. It's got a sort of a matte frosted finish to the bead, and you need your usual tools, your pliers. I do use a hammer, and I use this ring mandrel, but if you don't have a ring mandrel, you could use anything that's cylindrical that will fit your finger. So I'm using 0.8 millimeter, 0.8, and I'm cutting roughly about 8 inches, 7 to 8 inches. Really the length is completely dependent on how spirally you want to make this ring. So if you didn't want it too fancy, I'm also using 0.4 for binding. So those are the 2 wires you need, the 0.4 and the 0.8. So you're going to start off with 3 lengths of 0.8, so that's the 20 gauge, and just hold them and straighten them out a bit because you want to bind them at the center and you want them to stay one on top of the other and not bunch up into a clump. So use that little piece of binding wire to wrap around all 3 and then grip it flat and carry on using the other end of the wire to wrap a little bit around, and then flatten that out and cut off any excess. Make sure that little spiky bit of end wire is not sticking outside the big wires, and then just finish off on the opposite side while you're holding it all flat so that you don't get the wires bunching up. Holding it like that means that you keep all those wires one on top of the other sitting parallel. So once you've done that, you scooch it all together, flatten it out, and just spend a bit of time making that binding look as neat as you can, because that's going to be at the back of your ring and you will see it at the back. So now we've done the binding, we're going to start shaping. So what you do, if you can get a ring mandrel, place that at the back and then push both ends of the wire around until they cross over. So you want them to be totally crossed over at the front, and that should be on the ring size that you are making. So that should be your absolute ring size. And if you were going to do the other version, you'll see you just bind it on both sides. You don't actually close the ring. But anyway, we're doing this one now. So cut another bit of binding wire, and this is going to be the wire that holds the ring shank together. So you want to bind opposite the last binding, the back binding. So again, wrap it around, try and keep all those wires sitting one on top of the other. That's really the hardest thing because, you know, wires want to just, they're round and they want to bunch up. If you were doing this with square wire, it would be much easier because they would sit one on top of the other you know, without sort of like wanting to bunch. So once you've got a few bindings in place like that, make sure you have the cut ends on the outside, not the inside of the ring shank, because you don't want to push your finger in one day and find that there's a scratchy little end that scratches your finger. So keep those cut ends on the outer side that you're looking at. So again, scooch them all up, flatten them all down, and I tend to put it back on my ring stick just to check that the bindings are opposite each other, they haven't slipped. I give them a little, just a gentle tap, and that's sort of like, you know, makes them firm and solid. And then just check it for size. Does it fit? Is it the right size? And once you know that it fits, then you can spread out all the projecting wires. You just sort of like ease them or fan them out like that. So now we're ready. You could feed beads, as I said, on all of them, but I'm just going to put one bead because I think it's the spirals make it. So choose either, but any of the outside wires, so that one or the other outer wire. And then what you do is you create a little bit of a curl. So go with your tips of your round nose pliers and create that rounded curl. And just spiral that a tiny bit more. You don't want it bigger than the bead because this is going to sit on top of the bead. So you don't have to hammer it. I tend to hammer it because I like to flatten and spread it and make it sort of splay out a bit more, and it also work hardens it. But you can if you want to, and then just flatten that little curl onto the side of the bead and make sure it's sitting nice and flat and flush, and then curl the bead around so that the wire hugs it tightly on the outside, and that will give it a sort of nice surround or frame. So that's your one bead positioned in place on your ring. And then for the rest you just want to make spirals. So you're making little tiny loops and then holding and gripping in your flat nose pliers and curling and curling and curling around themselves to create these spirals. If you didn't want to do spirals, you could do little squares, you could do other shapes, you could, I mean, you know, like everything with wire work, the variations are endless. And if you don't want them as long, you can, you know, have sort of one longer and then they're sort of going smaller and smaller. So I'm just going to speed up now my spiraling so you don't have to laboriously watch me. So this is me at high speed going around the bend. And so you just spiral all of those protruding, projecting wires, bringing them in. You don't have to sort of like work out where they're going to sit at this point. Just bring them all in towards the center of the ring, and then we'll spend a bit of time sorting it all out. So there you have it. You've got them all spiraled in. So now put it back onto your ring stick, and you want to hide that binding wire there. So take any one of those spirals. There's no sort of one way of doing this. So I promise you, every time you make this, it'll look slightly different. So just pick one of the spirals and you can flip it over or you can spiral it in, and that can sit covering that bit of binding. So you won't ever see the binding again. And now it's up to you to keep working out where you want to position all these spirals. And don't forget, you don't want them sticking out too far outside the ring shank, because if you're going to wear it, what you'll find is that it could catch, because you know they're still wire and they're still soft. So keep them quite condensed and close to the size of the ring, but obviously that's completely up to you. So I'm just spending a bit of time playing around with how I want to position the spirals for my ring. So I'm just looking at it, moving them around, and you know, sometimes you feel they want to sort of naturally sit in one place. So I'm almost there now. It's just a question of, tweaking and moving, and all that movement that you do actually work hardens. And then I just little tap on while it's on the mandrel, because if any of those spirals needs to curve around, and it also work hardens them. And all this, as I say, this movement makes it stronger. And there you have it. I think we're ready to go. It's ready to be worn. So that is the spiral ring or the cocktails ring. So have fun making your own. And here's the variation, which is adjustable, which you'll find in one of my project books. So it looks very similar, but I haven't used as much wire on that one. So those are the two versions. So enjoy making your own variations. Thank you.